Russian officials are scrambling, contradicting each other, and desperately trying to frame this as a minor incident. But behind closed doors, sources say the Kremlin is in full shock mode. Security forces are locking down key areas, elite units are being moved into Moscow, and intelligence agencies are tearing apart every lead trying to figure out who breached the system. Was it internal? Was it external? Was it someone close to the Kremlin? A confirmed assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin has sent a shockwave through Russia's political core, creating an atmosphere of fear, secrecy, and frantic speculation. The moment news leaked, first through obscure channels, then through hesitant official acknowledgement, the country felt a tremor that went far beyond a simple security breach. For years, Putin has projected an image of invulnerability, a leader shielded by an impenetrable wall of intelligence, elite guards, and meticulous planning. But this incident shattered that illusion in an instant. What truly shook Russia wasn't just the attempt itself, but the fact that it happened despite the Kremlin's famously tight protective measures. Ordinary citizens reacted with disbelief, some with panic, others with quiet whispers of what this could mean for the nation's future. Inside Moscow, government officials scrambled behind closed doors, urgently seeking answers, demanding updates, and trying to determine whether this was an isolated attack or part of a larger, coordinated effort. Rumors spread rapidly. Was it a foreign operation, a domestic rebellion, or something even more alarming? A betrayal from within Putin's own circle. The Kremlin's slow, cautious confirmation only deepened suspicion. Their initial refusal to provide clear details suggested that the leadership was blindsided, struggling to regain control over the narrative. Security forces were deployed across multiple regions, armed checkpoints appeared almost overnight, and a palpable tension began to hang over major cities as if the country were bracing for another strike. Analysts note that such attempts are rare not because there is no opposition, but because Putin's security apparatus is known for aggressively neutralizing threats long before they materialize. The very fact that this attempt breached any layer of protection is a seismic event that could signal cracks in the system. Russian state media attempted to downplay the chaos, framing it as a contained situation, but citizens have grown wary of official narratives, especially during moments of national crisis. Social media became the true battleground, filled with leaked videos, chaotic speculation, and emotional outbursts from people concerned about what instability might follow. Many fear that the aftermath could lead to harsher crackdowns, intensified surveillance, and sweeping arrests under the justification of national security. At the same time, some quietly wonder whether this event might expose deeper divisions that have long existed beneath the surface of the Kremlin's rigid hierarchy. Internationally, governments expressed cautious concern, aware that any sudden shift in Russian leadership could dramatically impact geopolitical balances, ongoing conflicts, and fragile diplomatic arrangements. But inside Russia, the emotional impact is far more raw. For supporters, the attempt feels like an attack on the nation itself. For critics, it sparks uneasy questions about how secure, stable, or unified the country truly is. No matter the political perspective, one thing is clear: this event has pierced the aura of certainty that once surrounded Putin's leadership. The psychological effect on the government, on the public, and on the future of Russia's political landscape cannot be undone. The attempt has forced the nation to confront an uncomfortable truth. If the leader once believed to be untouchable can be targeted, then the structures that keep Russia stable may not be as solid as they seem. Russia's political machinery went into immediate emergency mode the moment intelligence officials confirmed that the assassination attempt on Putin was not just real but far more sophisticated than early reports had suggested, triggering a chain reaction of paranoia, internal suspicion, and frantic damage control that spread through the Kremlin like a shockwave within minutes. High-ranking security officers were summoned to restricted underground briefing rooms where panicked whispers about internal leaks and operational failures filled the air. and the normally disciplined environment felt charged with an unusual level of fear as officials realized this was no random incident but a carefully orchestrated strike that had exploited vulnerabilities they never imagined could exist, and as analysts dissected the sequence of events frame by frame, they discovered with growing alarm that the attack required precise knowledge of Putin's movements, timing, and decoy protocols, information accessible only to a tightly guarded circle of trusted individuals, fueling immediate speculation that someone within the inner circle might have provided access either deliberately or under coercion, causing Putin's closest advisors to quietly turn their suspicions toward one another in a climate already strained by political pressure, military setbacks, and internal power struggles. In the hours that followed, emergency security sweeps were ordered inside elite government facilities. Personal devices of senior officials were seized for forensic review, and top-tier counterintelligence units were activated to interrogate staff members, examine encrypted communications, and track every digital signal anomaly detected in the days leading up to the attack. While sources inside the Kremlin described Putin as furious, demanding immediate accountability and sweeping restructuring of the protective units responsible for his safety, a reaction that set off waves of fear among officials who understood that even a minor oversight could now be career-ending or worse. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's public messaging remained vague and controlled, offering only brief acknowledgement of a security incident, while concealing the deeper truth that investigators were uncovering signs of long-term infiltration, multiple support points around the capital, and strategic timing that suggested months of surveillance had been conducted right under the noses of Russia's most elite security forces, raising the terrifying possibility that the operation was assisted by someone with intimate knowledge of federal protocols. As this reality sank in, political elites began shifting alliances behind closed doors, some distancing themselves from struggling officials, others strengthening ties with powerful factions to ensure protection if the situation worsened, and a handful of oligarchs quietly moved funds abroad in anticipation of potential instability. Knowing Russia's political crises often spiral unpredictably, debates erupted in confidential war rooms about whether the attempt was executed by foreign intelligence agencies seeking to provoke chaos, by domestic extremist factions growing desperate under economic pressure, or by internal rivals unhappy with Putin's increasingly unilateral leadership style. And although no theory could yet be verified, the sophistication of the attack forced intelligence chiefs to consider all scenarios equally, deepening mistrust and hardening political lines inside Moscow. Investigators continued to uncover more anomalies, encrypted messages that didn't match routine patterns, unusual movements near critical infrastructure in the days before the attack, and unexplained gaps in surveillance footage that suggested systems had been manipulated rather than malfunctioning, leading specialists to fear that the network behind the attempt might be far more extensive and technologically advanced than initially assumed. While all of this unfolded, state television maintained calm, carefully scripted narratives insisting that Russia remained stable and unified. But the reality behind the scenes was a government shaken to its core, where every conversation felt like a test of loyalty, every silence carried suspicion, and every official feared they were one misstep away from being blamed for the breach. Even within Russia's military hierarchy, whispers began circulating about certain commanders gaining or losing influence depending on their perceived loyalty, and long-standing rivalries resurfaced as individuals positioned themselves for shifting power dynamics, aware that leadership uncertainty often leads to rapid changes in hierarchy. Tensions deepened when investigators discovered that the attackers appeared to possess precise technical understanding of Russia's protective communication channels, decoy movement strategies, and emergency relocation procedures, knowledge safeguarded within the highest levels of national security, intensifying concern that the breach originated far closer to the center of power than anyone wanted to admit, pushing Putin's inner circle into a defensive posture where secrecy became absolute and access to the president tightened even further. And beyond the political corridors, the Russian public reacted with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and speculation as rumors spread online about explosions, intercepted drones, and unidentified operatives seen near restricted zones, fueling anxiety as people questioned how such an attack could occur despite Russia's extensive security apparatus. As the investigation expanded, new evidence emerged suggesting the attackers tested multiple approaches over time, analyzing response patterns and exploiting blind spots, a revelation that prompted emergency upgrades to surveillance networks, increased checkpoints around Moscow, and intensified monitoring of political dissent, while behind the scenes, intelligence analysts worked around the clock to map connections between suspects, trace digital footprints, and determine whether internal sabotage was part of a larger plan to weaken the Kremlin's stability. In the end, the aftermath of the attempted assassination left Putin's administration visibly strained, navigating a fragile balance between maintaining outward control and confronting the terrifying reality of a breach that exposed deep vulnerabilities in the nation's security structure, reshaping internal politics, fueling suspicion among powerful elites, and setting the stage for sweeping changes that would reverberate through Russia's government for months to come. The fallout from the assassination attempt on Putin spread through Russia's intelligence network with a speed and intensity that immediately revealed how deeply the incident rattled the state's sense of control, triggering a massive and unprecedented expansion of surveillance and counterintelligence measures across the country as authorities scrambled to identify not just who carried out the attack, but who might still be planning additional strikes. And as investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover a complex pattern of digital footprints, encrypted communications, and suspicious travel activity that suggested the plotters had been operating inside Russia long before the attempt was executed, moving silently through major cities, meeting in discreet safe houses, and exploiting weak points in regional security infrastructure that Moscow had long overlooked because it believed its internal surveillance systems were impenetrable. These revelations forced security officials to confront a painful truth they had resisted for years, that despite the Kremlin's constant public claims of total control, the country's intelligence networks were riddled with blind spots, corrupt officials, outdated technology, and gaps created by years of political favoritism, where positions of power were awarded not based on skill but loyalty, leaving Russia vulnerable to infiltration by actors far more sophisticated and determined than anyone inside the system had anticipated. And as more details emerged, counterintelligence teams realized the threat wasn't limited to a single region or faction, but spread across multiple layers of society, from former military officers disillusioned with Russia's geopolitical strategy to underground political groups emboldened by growing economic hardship and public frustration, creating a chaotic environment where identifying the real masterminds became incredibly difficult because every new lead pointed to another network, another motive, and another layer of secrecy. Meanwhile, the attack's proximity to Putin physically and logistically led investigators to prioritize surveillance of individuals with historical ties to the president's security operations, including former operatives who previously had access to sensitive data and protocols, prompting dozens of emergency interrogations, renewed background checks, and covert monitoring of individuals once considered loyal. And this widening dragnet created intense fear among officials who suddenly found themselves under suspicion simply because they had worked near sensitive information at some point in their careers. At the same time, Russia's digital intelligence units began aggressively scanning encrypted channels on the dark web, intercepting anonymous payment transfers, and monitoring unusual purchases of specialized equipment because the level of planning behind the attempt indicated that the group responsible had access to resources far beyond what a small domestic cell could acquire, suggesting potential foreign backing or collaboration with exiled Russian activists now living in Europe who had openly criticized Putin's regime and allegedly maintained contacts inside Russia willing to take risks for political change. And although there was no definitive proof linking any specific foreign government to the attack, Russian authorities used the ambiguity to justify expanding internal surveillance even further, implementing new monitoring protocols that targeted journalists, activists, business leaders, and even mid-level government workers, creating an atmosphere of paranoia that spread far beyond the political elite. Public spaces in major cities saw a sharp increase in unmarked patrol units and facial recognition checkpoints, while digital service providers were pressured to hand over user data under the pretext of national security, and residents reported more frequent questioning, unexpected visits from local security officers, and heightened restrictions around government buildings, contributing to a sense of unease that made ordinary citizens feel as though they were suddenly living inside a vast security experiment where trust was scarce and every misinterpreted action could trigger unwanted attention from authorities. Meanwhile, foreign intelligence agencies observed Russia's heightened activity with growing concern, as the Kremlin's aggressive counterintelligence risked destabilizing the region by increasing tensions, creating unpredictable shifts in military readiness, and raising fears that Russia might misinterpret unrelated incidents as coordinated foreign interference, potentially escalating diplomatic conflicts or prompting retaliatory cyber operations. And Western analysts warned that the Kremlin's increasingly opaque and repressive internal environment made it far more likely that Russia would lash out externally to project an image of strength even as internal fractures deepened. Inside the Kremlin, Putin's advisors debated how much of the investigation's progress should be revealed to the public, aware that showing weakness could damage Russia's international image, but also recognizing that hiding too much could fuel conspiracy theories and domestic unrest. And this internal struggle created conflicting narratives in state media, where some reports emphasized the swift efficiency of Russian security forces while others hinted at shadowy foreign involvement, effectively shifting blame outward without confirming any specific details. And these inconsistent messages left citizens confused and increasingly skeptical of official statements. Meanwhile, the counterintelligence operation expanded into Russia's financial sector, as investigators traced suspicious money flows connected to shell companies, cryptocurrency exchanges, and anonymous donors believed to have assisted the plotters, uncovering signs of a coordinated funding network that stretched beyond Russia's borders and involved individuals who had avoided detection for years by exploiting loopholes in international financial systems, prompting the Kremlin to quietly pressure foreign banks and governments for customer information under the justification of global security cooperation. Although many of these requests were met with reluctance or outright refusal, deepening Russia's frustration and reinforcing its narrative that outside forces were obstructing justice. As weeks passed, the investigation became so vast that its sheer size strained Russia's intelligence infrastructure, with overworked analysts handling massive amounts of data, regional officers conducting non-stop interrogations, and senior officials pushing for rapid results to satisfy Putin's demand for answers, creating a frantic environment where mistakes became more likely and false leads more common. Yet despite the challenges, investigators continued to zero in on a handful of suspects believed to be directly involved in the planning phase, though capturing them proved difficult as several had already disappeared, likely warned by someone with access to the investigation's progress, reinforcing growing fears that the operation had been penetrated from the inside. Ultimately, the widening counterintelligence effort transformed Russia into a nation operating under a massive internal security crackdown, where fear, suspicion, and secrecy dominated daily life. And although the Kremlin insisted these measures were temporary responses to an extraordinary threat, many analysts believe the changes represented a long-term shift toward even greater political control and surveillance, with the assassination attempt becoming the catalyst for an era in which the government's obsession with rooting out hidden enemies would shape Russia's future far more deeply than the public could yet understand.